Well, having put some thought into this, how did I get started with, in woodwork? And a lot of people, do through high school wood shop. So my dad, I learned a lot from him as I was growing up. He probably put a chainsaw in my hands when I was 12 years old. Oh, wow. Let me make my first cuts with a chainsaw. And then, of course, high school shop class, made a few things. And I was making a table, and I wanted to have round legs. And so the instructor introduced me to the wood lathe. And I didn't touch a wood lathe for many years and decades after that. Never had a reason to. But then thinking back a little bit further on, I'm a native of Montana. Grew up in Hamilton, didn't grow up. I was born in Hamilton, Montana, in the Bitter Earth Valley, which of course is a really beautiful place. And I remember my grandfather was a woodworker, and I used to play underneath his table saw in all the sawdust. And, I love the smell.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, it was, and so that was probably part of it. And my grandfather worked in a sawmill at one time, and a big cedar burl came into the mill. And so the mill workers sawed it into slabs, and each of them took a slab home. And my grandfather made a coffee table out of it. And a cousin sent me a video on a stick, and this thing is probably God knows how many years old, decades ago, and I can't recognize anybody in the video. It's probably from the 50s. And you scan around, and there's that table.
Oh my gosh.
And so despite all the relatives, sisters, brothers, aunts, uncles, cousins, I wound up with that table.
Wow.
And I have it in my shop, and it needs to get refinished for probably the third or fourth time. And, of course, I was always mesmerized by that table. And, just kind of looking down into the wood grain of a burl, kind of glows, and the grain swirls around. And so I've always kind of had, always liked burls a lot. And so that's, I try to focus most all of my wood turning on burls. And then, so like I said, it had been decades since I'd touched a wood lathe. And then my wife wanted a dining room table. And I said, well, I need a wood lathe to turn the legs. Mm-hmm. And so I bought this really inexpensive wood lathe and very crude machine. Oh, we got some lightning. And a very, very crude machine. And I started making bottle stoppers, which were, quick and easy to make and fun to learn. Mm-hmm. And then, and I just wound up kept doing it, and then I started making larger stuff, and then I outgrew that lathe and its capabilities, and so I bought a little bit of an upgrade to a little better machine, and then within a few years I wanted to turn bigger, more out of balance pieces of wood. Like if you look around the gallery, you'll see a lot of pieces of wood that are certainly asymmetrical or weights all on one side, and so I needed a bigger lathe that would turn at slower speeds. And so I found one, and it was in Salem, and it was a very long story. Anyway, I went to go buy it. And drove all the way to Salem. And I got there, and how it turned out was this woman was selling it. It had been her father's, and he had passed away, and everything in the house was gone. And the only thing left was this wood lathe and all the tools and accessories that went with it. And I was just buying the lathe. And then she said, the house is sold. Everything has to be gone by Wednesday. Just take it all. And so he bought quality tools, things that I never would have invested the money in. And if it weren't for that, I wouldn't be able to do what I do. And so I passed on to the woman what's going on with my show and such. And she said, I'm telling the family.
That's so sweet. The title of your show feels very meaningful. What's kind of the story behind it, and how do you see it connecting the work together?
Well, we have a neighbor, Donna Quinn. You may know her, and she's become a good friend over the years. And so she got me tied in with the art center, and said you've got to fill out an application and all these things, and she's been a real driving force in what I do. And so the show was coming up, and we were like, we need a title. And so we're just, the text messages just flying back and forth. What about this? What about that? And so she came up with Anomalous Wood, which was a good start. And I thought, I like that. And then eventually I came up with Phantasmal. And so people such as myself probably need to look up the definitions. And so I thought, well, hopefully that'll spark enough interest that people need to walk into the art center and see if it really is phantasmal and anomalous for themselves, to see if it fits.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. That's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know what it meant when you picked out that word? Phantasmal?
I don't remember how I came up with that. I honestly don't. And I had to look up anomalous, and I still can't spell it right every time. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's still pretty intriguing, though.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely a kind of vocabulary beyond me, at least.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You kind of talked about this already, but could you talk any more about how your upbringing and surroundings shaped your work upstairs?
My dad and I tackling various projects. Why would you spend money on something when you can build it yourself? And so a lifetime of learning to use tools, really, from my dad and my shop teachers, and then I've worked so many different jobs, and construction and fence building and everything else under the sun, and logging, and I worked at hunting and fishing lodge. I had my two friends with me earlier, and we worked together in the Alaskan bush more than 40 years ago. And a bush pilot. So I've done just about everything under the sun. And all of that gave me quite a diversity in the tools that I have, and maybe the creative thinking and being exposed to a lot of different things.
Yeah, transferable skills.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. How long do you think you would say you've been making wood pieces specifically for art?
Oh, specifically for art.
Sorry, kind of a question that just
Yeah, I don't know where that would have happened. I had a sister who was an architect and an artist, and she, once I started getting reasonably skilled in my techniques on the lathe, and she said that I've always had a good sense of size and proportion, and she said, I always knew you were an artist.
Oh, that's sweet. Some intuition.
Yeah, I used to do tool leather and things like that, and so she said, I've always known you were an artist. and then I had several pieces, and she said, those are gallery worthy pieces.
Yeah.
And I was surprised. I went, really? Yeah.
Yeah, they are. Really? Oh, that's great. What's it been like diving into a creative process and building a body of work so quickly?
Well, I'm not sure that it was quick. I probably have pieces up there that I, might be 5 years old perhaps, maybe 4, when, I started producing nicer pieces. And my goal for this show was 30 pieces. And yeah, and plus the raffle item. And so my teaching schedule was very busy this winter, and I wound up 5 weeks before the show started, and I was probably 6 pieces short or more. And so I had to get to work, but I had a really big piece mounted, and I was determined, because it was my largest piece ever, And so I wanted to finish that, and it took a long time. But it was worth it. And so, in that 5 weeks, I was able to make those 5 or 6 pieces. And as far as the creative process, like I say, I like to work with burls because I like how the wood glows and the grains twist and all of that. And so I get a piece of wood from whatever source, and a lot of times it's green, and so I have to let it dry for a year or two. And then after it dries, and of course, sometimes I'll paint it, sometimes I'll put wax on it to try to slow the drying process to reduce the cracking. And I'm very rarely successful with that. And it's nerve-wracking from beginning to end, literally. And so once I've got a piece of wood that I know is cured and it's ready to turn, I often have it sitting there for another year or two when I'm thinking about how in the world will I mount this on the lathe in a secure and safe way so it doesn't fly off the lathe. And then, how am I going to shape this? And a lot of times it depends largely on the shape of the wood. Is it elongated or is it kind of round? That kind of helps you make a decision. And then as so you get it mounted on the lathe, you start the shaping process and get it kind of round. And of course, most wood turners will avoid pieces of wood with cracks or voids. And I have so much wood that has so many cracks and voids. I'm just like, let's just work with this.
Yeah, just put it on.
Don't keep turning wood away until it's perfectly round. Just at some point stop and let the character of the wood come through with its natural, flaws, which can look pretty cool.
Yeah.
And so that's and then a lot of times something will happen. What happens when you're turning wood is sometimes you'll get a catch, and that means you introduced the tool to the wood too fast, or you put it in there improperly, and the wood catches and pivots the tool up, and it can be really scary if it's a bad catch. And so that will always put a gouge in the wood. And so I've had pieces where I was getting close to finishing them, and all of a sudden I got a bad catch, which went a quarter, half-inch deep. And so everything changes at that point.
Yeah.
And the shape can change and everything else. So it's a nerve-wracking process from beginning to end. It's like, should I paint this or put wax on it, so it doesn't crack, or this or that? And then what am I going to make it? How am I going to get it mounted? And then you get it mounted, and you have a vision, and you start turning, and then that vision changes, and you have to work with it, and then you get a bad catch. And catches can be pretty scary, but what a lot of people, I think, retire. And they're like, what am I going to do the rest of my life? And so some go, I'll buy a wood lathe and I'll turn wood, and which is great. And I'll make pans and things like that, which is really cool. And then some of them get a bad catch, and it scares the bejeevers out of them. And all of a sudden, there's some really nice used lathes out there for sale. And a lot of them are there because, somebody said, this is the most dangerous machine I've ever run, which it really isn't. And
Right.
they just, something happened, and they didn't take steps to correct it. So that's kind of the process from beginning to end. And then when is a piece finished? There's times when I'm getting close to the end when I'm making very fine cuts and trying to hold the tool very, very steady, trying to decide which tool to use. The tool's got to be sharp. And there's times when I'm holding my breath as I'm trying to move my tool across the rest to, smooth something out, something like that. And then of course, you get it to some point. I've learned a process. I shouldn't necessarily say a process, but I think my work improved when I started this, what I'll call finish the curve. And so, if you're making a curve in the piece of wood, don't have an accelerated finish, but make sure you stand back and look at the sweep and make sure that you finish it, because it's easy to not finish it. And so anyway, that's one thing I started doing, and I'm very conscious of. And then the sanding starts, and there's a piece up there that in the gallery that probably has a day and a half of sanding invested in it.
Wow.
It takes a long time, especially if the wood is hard, and especially if something goes wrong. Sometimes you buy a piece of sandpaper, and there'll be a rebel grit of rock that sticks out, and it puts a scratch across the whole thing.
Right.
And so you have to start over, and then you have to decide what kind of finish to put on it, and at some point, when you're shaping and when you're sanding, you just go, I've had enough. This is too nerve-wracking. I'm just calling it quits. And then of course you put the finish on, and it's like, do I put one coat on, 2 coats, 3 coats? And then you go, that's enough.
That's enough.
Yeah, I'm done. But I can't look at a single piece without thinking about what I should have done differently.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it's just I think I've heard that most artists are like that. You don't really like your own work because you see things that should have been done differently.
Right. You see the whole process, and you could do more.
Yeah, it's like, I shouldn't have left that like that.
That's very common.
Yeah, it's nerve-wracking.
Yeah, it's nerve-wracking from beginning to end.
Yes.
Wow. Okay, last question. Since you're largely self-taught, what would you say to somebody who wants to start making art but doesn't have a formal background?
I've put quite a bit of thought into this because you gave me the question ahead of time. And what I would say is look at the works of others, and not that you're going to try to mimic what they're doing, but I think they would inspire you to make your own art at that point.
Oh yeah,
And
that's
that's it.
That's it. Hey, that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
That's a great answer. Yeah, well, that's all I got for you. Do you have anything else you'd like to say?
No, I don't think so.
Get it out.
Yeah, I'm just glad that everybody likes it.
A huge thank you to Ray Guse for taking the time to share his process in his new exhibit. Be sure to see Phantasmal Secrets and Anomalous Wood now through Saturday, August 29th at Art Center East.